Before we descend into the shadows of 1982 Berlin, if you appreciate these deep dives into the untold histories of the Cold War and the silent battles fought in the dark, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us uncover these files. The city of West Berlin in October 1982 did not feel like a city. It felt like an island, a solitary raft of neon lights and Western decadence floating in a vast, gray sea of Soviet control. For the men and women who worked out of the Teufelsberg listening station or the unmarked offices within the U.S. consulate in Dahlem, the Berlin Wall wasn't just a physical barrier of concrete and barbed wire. It was a pressure valve, and on the morning of October 14th, that valve was about to burst. Elias Thorn stood by the window of a fourth-floor apartment in the Kreuzberg district, watching the rain streak against the glass. The view outside was a study in desolation. Directly across the street, the wall sliced through the neighborhood like a scar. On his side, the western side, the concrete was covered in graffiti, sprayed messages of hope, rebellion, and crude humor. On the other side, the death strip was a pristine, raked expanse of sand, illuminated by floodlights that hummed with a low, menacing electric buzz, even in the dull morning light. Thorn was 44 years old, though his file at Langley claimed he was 38. The Cold War had a way of aging people faster than nature intended. He was a case officer for the Central Intelligence Agency's Berlin station, a man who had spent the better part of a decade moving assets across borders that weren't supposed to be crossed. He wasn't a soldier, though he carried himself with the rigid discipline of one. He was a handler, a fixer, a man who specialized in the impossible logistics of human extraction. Today, the logistics were worse than impossible. They were suicidal. The phone on the small wooden table in the center of the room rang. It was a standard rotary model, black, heavy plastic. It rang once, then stopped, then rang twice. Thorn picked it up on the third ring but said nothing. "The package is ready for collection," a voice said on the other end. It was a woman's voice, accented, clipped. "But the weather has turned. The forecast predicts a storm." "Understood," Thorn said. "We'll bring umbrellas." He hung up. The code was simple, almost childish, but the meaning was grave. The package was Heinrich Vogel, a mid-level signals intelligence officer within the Stasi, the East German secret police. Vogel wasn't just another bureaucrat. He was a cryptographic prodigy who had spent the last 3 years overseeing the encryption protocols for the Soviet military communication lines running through East Germany. He held the keys to the kingdom. If the CIA could get Vogel out, they wouldn't just be reading the Stasi's mail. They would be reading the Red Army's battle plans. But "the weather has turned" meant the mission profile had changed. The Stasi knew something. Maybe not everything, maybe not the who or the when, but they knew a breach was imminent. The storm meant that the extraction, originally scheduled as a low-profile border crossing using false diplomatic papers, was now compromised. Thorn lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up toward the peeling paint of the ceiling. He had a team of 4 operatives waiting in a garage in the wedding district. They were the best extraction unit in the European theater, a ghost squad that didn't officially exist on any station roster. They were ready. The question was whether Thorn was ready to send them into a city that had suddenly woken up and realized it was being robbed. He checked his watch. 800 hours. The extraction was set for 2100 hours. 13 hours to wait. 13 hours for the Stasi to tighten the net. Thorn grabbed his trench coat and headed for the door. The game was in motion, and in Berlin, once the wheels started turning, there was no way to stop them without a collision. To understand why the agency was willing to risk a kinetic incident in the heart of East Berlin, one had to understand Heinrich Vogel. He was not a brave man. In the psychological profiles constructed by Langley's behavioral science unit, Vogel was categorized as risk-averse and ideologically hollow. He didn't want to defect because he loved democracy or hated communism. He wanted to defect because he was terrified. Vogel had made a mistake 6 months prior. During a routine audit of the secure communications relay at the Karlshorst compound, he had stumbled upon a file that wasn't meant for his eyes. It was a directive from Moscow, a contingency plan labeled Operation Ryan. It detailed the Soviet belief that a Western nuclear first strike was imminent and outlined the preemptive measures the KGB and Stasi were to take. These measures included the systematic liquidation of potential internal threats, dissidents, double agents, and anyone with knowledge that could be used by the West. Vogel saw his own name on a secondary list. It wasn't a liquidation order, not yet, but it was a surveillance priority. The system he served had turned its gaze toward him. Paranoia was the fuel of the East German state, and Vogel knew that once the machine started watching you, it was only a matter of time before it decided to consume you. He had reached out to the Americans through a dead drop in a park in Pankow, leaving a microdot concealed inside a hollowed-out bolt on a park bench. It had taken 3 months to verify his identity and another 2 to plan the extraction. Vogel offered them the encryption codes for the upcoming Soviet military exercise, Shield 82. In exchange, he wanted a new life in Arizona. He had specifically requested Arizona because he had seen a picture of the Grand Canyon in a banned National Geographic magazine and decided that a place with so much open space was the exact opposite of the claustrophobic gray walls of East Berlin. But Vogel was unraveling. The reports from the handler, an undercover operative posing as a West German trade representative, indicated that the asset was drinking heavily and showing signs of severe anxiety. If Vogel cracked before the team could get to him, he wouldn't just confess. He would give up everything. The timeline had been accelerated twice already. Tonight was the absolute limit. Thorne drove his unmarked Opel Senator through the morning traffic of West Berlin. The car was heavy, solid, and outfitted with a modified engine block and reinforced suspension. He drove past the ruin of the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church, its jagged spire a permanent reminder of the last war's destruction. The city was a monument to consequences. He was heading to the safe house in Wedding to brief the team. The extraction plan, codenamed Iron Gambit, relied on a single, fragile point of failure, a modified utility truck belonging to the municipal waterworks of East Berlin. The truck was scheduled to perform maintenance on a sewage line that ran beneath the Spree River, close to the Friedrichstrasse station. The CIA had bought the driver, a man named Klaus, for 50,000 Deutsche Marks. The plan was for Vogel to be smuggled into the back of the truck inside a specialized containment unit disguised as a water filtration pump. Klaus would drive the truck to a specific checkpoint at the Oberbaum Bridge, where a bribed border guard would wave them through during the shift change. It was a classic needle thread, high risk, high precision, but Thorne couldn't shake the feeling from the phone call. The weather has turned. If the Stasi had turned the border guard, or if they had surveillance on the truck, the team wouldn't be driving into an extraction. They would be driving into a kill box. Thorne parked the Opel in an alleyway behind a nondescript auto repair shop. He checked his rearview mirror, scanning for tails. He waited 5 minutes, watching the street. Nothing. He stepped out into the rain, the collar of his coat turned up against the chill. He walked to the rear door of the shop, tapped a rhythm on the steel, 2 fast, 1 slow, 2 fast, and waited for the lock to disengage. The interior of the safe house smelled of stale coffee, gun oil, and high-voltage electronics. It was a converted mechanic's garage, the windows blacked out with heavy rubberized sheeting. In the center of the room, illuminated by a hanging industrial lamp, 4 people sat around a large map of Berlin spread across a workbench. They stopped talking when Thorne entered. These were not the tuxedo-wearing spies of cinema. They were technicians of violence and evasion. First was Miller, the driver. He was a former stock car racer from North Carolina who had found his way into the Special Forces and then into the paramilitary branch of the agency. He could drive anything with wheels, and he could drive it fast enough to outrun a helicopter. He was leaning back in a metal chair, whittling a piece of wood with a switchblade. Next was Sarah, the surveillance expert. She was small, quiet, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to record everything. She was responsible for the electronic countermeasures, the scanners that would detect Stasi listening devices and the jammers that would block their radio frequencies. She was checking the battery packs on a bulky piece of equipment that looked like an oversized radio. Then there was Kowal, the muscle, a Polish-American giant who spoke little and moved with surprising grace for his size. He was the breacher. If a door needed to open and didn't want to, Kowal was the key. He was currently cleaning a Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun, his movements methodical and rhythmic. Finally, there was the team leader on the ground, a man simply known as Bishop. Bishop was British, on loan from MI6 for this specific operation due to his extensive knowledge of the East Berlin sewer systems and underground infrastructure. He was the strategist. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Elias," Bishop said, not looking up from the map. "The signal changed," Thorne said, walking to the table. "Asset reports the weather has turned. Storm warning." The room went silent. The sound of Koval's cleaning cloth on the metal of the gun seemed to amplify. "How bad?" Miller asked, closing his knife. "Bad enough that we assume the primary route is burned," Thorne said. "We assume they know something is happening tonight. They might not know it's Vogel, and they might not know it's the water truck, but the threat level just went from elevated to critical." "If the weather is bad, we scrub," Sarah said, her voice pragmatic. "We don't go in blind. That's the protocol." "We can't scrub," Thorne replied. "Vogel is cracking. If we leave him there another 24 hours, he'll walk into Stasi headquarters and turn himself in just to stop the waiting. It's tonight or never." Bishop leaned forward, tracing a line on the map with his finger. "If the bridge is compromised, we can't use the truck. They'll search every vehicle down to the wheel wells." "We stick with the truck," Thorne corrected, "but we change the entry. We don't go through the Oberbaum checkpoint. We go through the Invalidenstrasse crossing. It's tighter, more guards, but it's less expected for a utility vehicle." "That's a civilian crossing," Miller argued. "High traffic. If things go south, there are bystanders everywhere." "That's exactly why we use it," Thorne said. "The Stasi engage differently when there are witnesses. It buys us hesitation. And in this business, hesitation is the only currency that matters." Thorne pulled a dossier from his coat and slammed it on the table. "This is the updated intel on the border guard rotation at Invalidenstrasse. We don't have a man on the inside there. We're going to have to bluff our way through using forged transit papers for emergency infrastructure repair. Sarah, I need you to fabricate a work order for a catastrophic water main break in the Mid-District. Make it look official. Make it look urgent." Sarah nodded, already moving toward her equipment. "I can backdate the authorization stamps. It'll pass a visual inspection." "Koval," Thorne turned to the big man. "You're on point. If the guard reaches for the phone or his weapon, you neutralize the threat. No noise, suppressors only. We are not starting World War III at a toll booth." "Understood," Koval grunted. "Bishop," Thorne continued, "once you're inside, you have 30 minutes to get to the pickup point. Vogel will be waiting at the grandstand of the Friedrich Ludwig Jahn Sport Park. It's dark, open, and has multiple exit routes. Get him in the containment unit, get back to the truck, and get out." "And the exit?" Bishop asked. "We can't go back out through Invalidenstrasse. They'll log the entry and expect an exit. If we try to leave 10 minutes later, they'll be suspicious." "Exit is the Bornholmer Strasse crossing," Thorne said. "We've arranged a diversion. At 2145 hours, a diplomatic courier car will cause a scene at Checkpoint Charlie. A minor accident, lots of shouting. It should draw the senior shift commander's attention for a few minutes. That's your window." The plan was madness. It relied on precise timing, perfect forgeries, and a massive amount of luck. But looking at the faces of the team, Thorne saw no hesitation. They were professionals. They knew the odds. "Gear up," Thorne said. "We cross at twilight." The vehicle that would carry the team into the belly of the beast was a masterpiece of clandestine engineering. On the outside, it was a standard-issue IFA W50 truck, painted the drab olive gray of the East Berlin Municipal Services. It was dirty, rusted in the wheel arches, and smelled of diesel and sewage. It had the correct license plates, the correct registration stickers, and even the correct dent on the rear bumper, matched to a photo taken of a real utility truck 2 days prior. But underneath the skin, it was a fortress. The engine had been swapped for a high-performance Western block, muffled to sound like the clattering, underpowered East German original. The tires were run flats, filled with a dense foam core that could withstand small arms fire. The body panels were lined with Kevlar weaving, invisible to the naked eye but capable of stopping a Makarov pistol round. Inside the cargo area, hidden behind a facade of pipes, wrenches, and legitimate repair equipment, was the box. It was a shielded compartment, barely large enough for 2 people, lined with lead to block X-rays and thermal scanners. This was where Sarah and Koval would hide during the crossing. Bishop would ride up front in the passenger seat, dressed in the greasy coveralls of a supervisor. Miller would drive. At 1800 hours, darkness had fully descended on Berlin. The rain had intensified, turning the streets into slick ribbons of black. The team gathered by the truck. They wore the uniforms of the Wasserwirtschaft, the water authority. Beneath the coveralls, they wore low-profile body armor and tactical harnesses. Thorne stood by the rolling garage door. Radio silence until you cross back. If you get into trouble on the other side, you're on your own until you reach the extraction corridor. I can't send the cavalry into East Berlin. Don't worry, boss. Miller grinned, adjusting his worker's cap. I drive better when nobody's talking to me anyway. Bishop checked his weapon, a silenced Walther PPK, and tucked it into a hidden pocket in his coveralls. We'll bring him home, Elias. Thorne hit the button. The electric motor of the garage door hummed and the metal barrier rose, revealing the rainy night. Miller fired up the truck. It coughed a cloud of black smoke, a nice touch of authenticity, and rumbled out into the alley. Thorne watched the taillights fade into the gloom. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the anxiety of the handler who has released the hawk and can now only wait to see if it returns. He went back to the secure phone in the corner of the garage. He had one call to make to the station chief to confirm the operation was active. Iron Gambit is go, he said into the receiver. Copy that, the voice at the station replied. Godspeed. The truck moved through the streets of West Berlin, blending in with the evening traffic. Miller kept the speed limit, driving with a relaxed posture that belied the tension in the cabin. Next to him, Bishop stared straight ahead, his mind running through the contingencies. If they were stopped, he had a fake manifest claiming a ruptured main near the Soviet embassy, a priority target that no guard would want to delay fixing. They approached the Invalidenstrasse checkpoint. The lights of the border crossing loomed ahead, harsh sodium vapor lamps that washed everything in a sickly yellow glow. The barrier was down. 2 East German border guards, Grepos, stood in the rain, their Kalashnikovs slung over their shoulders, rain ponchos glistening. A third guard sat in the booth. Showtime, Miller whispered. He slowed the truck, gearing down. The brakes squealed slightly, another calculated imperfection. He rolled down the window as the guard approached. The cold, wet air of the east flooded the cabin. Papers, the guard demanded. He didn't say hello. They never did. Miller handed over the clipboard with the fabricated work order and their ID cards. The guard took them, shining a flashlight into the cab. He lingered on Bishop's face. Bishop looked bored, annoyed even, playing the part of a worker dragged out on a rainy night. Water main break? The guard asked, looking at the clipboard. Mita, Miller said in flawless German with a working-class Berliner accent. Basement of the ministry building is flooding. If we don't fix it, the comrades will be swimming to their desks in the morning. The guard grunted, scanning the paper. He walked to the back of the truck. Open it. Miller killed the engine. Is that necessary? We're already late. Open it, the guard repeated, his hand drifting toward his weapon. Miller sighed, opened the door, and walked to the back. Bishop watched in the side mirror, his hand inching toward his hidden pistol. If the guard decided to move the heavy pipes in the back, he would find the false compartment. Miller unlatched the rear doors. The guard shone his light inside. He saw piles of dirty pipes, a generator, welding gear, and muck. The smell of raw sewage, synthesized by the CIA tech boys, wafted out. The guard wrinkled his nose and stepped back. Smells like shit, the guard muttered. It is shit, Miller replied. It's a living. The guard waved his hand dismissively. Close it up, go. Miller latched the doors, suppressed a smile, and walked back to the cab. He climbed in, started the engine, and waited for the barrier to rise. The red and white pole lifted. Miller drove the truck forward, crossing the painted white line that marked the border. The tires hummed on the wet pavement. They were in the east. Clear. Miller said quietly. Don't celebrate yet, Bishop replied, his eyes scanning the dark streets. Now we have to find a man who doesn't want to be found. They drove deeper into the silent, dark heart of East Berlin. The contrast was immediate. The advertising signs and bright shop windows of the west were gone, replaced by dim streetlights and the looming, monolithic silhouettes of socialist architecture. The streets were emptier here. Every car that passed felt like a threat. In the back compartment, hidden in the cramped dark, Koval tapped Sarah on the shoulder. He held up a thumb. They had made it inside. But getting in was the easy part. The storm Vogel had warned about was gathering, and they were driving straight into the eye of it. The Friedrich Ludwig Jahn Sport Park was a monolithic expanse of concrete and darkness, sitting silently in the Prenzlauer Berg district. By day, it was a symbol of socialist athletic prowess. By night, under the relentless hammering of the autumn rain, it looked like a graveyard for giants. The floodlights were off, leaving the vast bowl of the stadium drowning in shadows. Miller parked the utility truck on a side street 2 blocks away from the main entrance. The engine idled with a rough, rhythmic chugging that masked the tension inside the cab. The street was empty, the windows of the nearby apartment blocks dark, their inhabitants retreated into the safety of their homes. In East Berlin, curiosity was a dangerous habit that most people had unlearned years ago. "Stay with the vehicle," Bishop instructed, checking the suppressor on his pistol one last time. "If we aren't back in 20 minutes, you leave. The mission scrubs, and you get yourself out via the emergency protocol." "I'm not leaving you here," Miller said, his grip tight on the steering wheel. "If we aren't back, we're dead or taken," Bishop replied, his voice devoid of sentiment. "Don't add to the body count. That's an order." Bishop slipped out of the passenger door, moving instantly into the cover of the building's facade. He was joined a moment later by Koval and Sarah, who had emerged from the hidden compartment in the back. They moved in a tight formation, utilizing hand signals instead of speech. The rain was their ally now, muffling their footsteps and blurring their silhouettes. They approached the stadium's perimeter fence. Koval found a section of chain link that had been previously weakened, likely by local kids sneaking in to play football, and peeled it back with silent, terrifying strength. They slipped through the gap. Inside, the stadium was a cavern of wind and wet concrete. The grandstands rose up around them like canyon walls. Bishop scanned the upper rows. The contact protocol was specific. Vogel was to be waiting in the press box located at the northern end of the stand, a vantage point that offered a view of the approaches but kept him hidden from the street. They moved up the concrete stairs, weapons drawn but held close to their bodies. The air smelled of wet leaves and old masonry. Every shadow seemed to move. Bishop felt the weight of the city pressing down on him. This was the heart of the enemy's territory, and he was walking around with a flashlight he dared not turn on. They reached the press box level. The door to the booth was ajar. Bishop signaled for Koval to take the left flank, Sarah the right. He approached the center. He pushed the door open with the toe of his boot. "Vogel," he whispered into the darkness. There was a scramble, the sound of a chair being knocked over. A figure lunged out of the corner, not attacking, but flinching. Bishop raised his hand, palm open. "It's us," Bishop said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Iron Gambit. We're here to take you to the canyon." Heinrich Vogel stepped into the faint ambient light filtering in from the street lamps below. He looked worse than the intelligence reports had suggested. He was a small man, balding, with thick glasses that were currently fogged with condensation. He was wearing a raincoat that was 2 sizes too big, and he was shaking so violently that Bishop could hear his teeth chattering. "You're late," Vogel hissed, his eyes darting past Bishop to the open door. "They are looking. The patrols. I saw a Vopo car pass twice." "We're here now," Bishop said, moving to secure the hallway. "Do you have the material?" Vogel clutched a leather satchel to his chest as if it contained his own heart. "It's all here. The codes, the Ryan protocols, everything. But we cannot go." "The bridge. I heard them." Bishop froze. "What did you hear?" "I have a radio scanner," Vogel stammered, pulling a small illegal handheld device from his pocket. "I was listening to the police frequencies. They aren't just at the borders. They have mobilized the Wach regiment. They are setting up a cordon around the Mitte district. They know a vehicle is coming." Bishop looked at Sarah. She pulled out her own scanner, a much more sophisticated piece of agency tech. She adjusted the frequency, listening to the burst of static and coded chatter. Her face went pale in the gloom. "He's right," Sarah whispered. "Traffic analysis shows a massive spike in encrypted comms. It's a grid search. They aren't looking for a specific car yet. They're closing the net on everything moving in this sector." The water truck, Bishop realized. If they stop us now, the cover won't hold. They'll search the back. "We have to move," Koval rumbled, his voice like gravel. Staying here is death. Bishop grabbed Vogel by the arm. Listen to me carefully, Heinrich. We are going to walk out of here. You are going to get into a box in the back of a truck, and it is going to be dark and uncomfortable. You will not make a sound. If you scream, if you knock, if you sneeze, we all die. Do you understand? Vogel nodded frantically, sweat mixing with the rain on his face. Yes, please, just get me out. They moved back down the stairs faster now. The sense of urgency had shifted from a simmer to a boil. They were no longer executing a plan. They were fleeing a burning building. When they returned to the truck, Miller had the engine revving. He had seen a patrol car drift slowly past the end of the street, its spotlight sweeping the parked cars. It hadn't stopped, but it had slowed down. They were hunting. Load up, Bishop ordered, shoving Vogel toward the rear doors. Koval, put him in the box. Sarah, get on the comms jammer. If they try to call in our license plate, I want their radios to scream static. They piled into the back. Koval practically threw Vogel into the lead-lined compartment and squeezed in beside him. Sarah took her position at the electronics console disguised as a generator, flipping switches. The hum of the jammer began to whine, a sound on the edge of human hearing. Bishop climbed into the front seat. Go, but keep it slow. If we speed, we attract attention. The Miller put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb. Where are we going? Bornholmer is the exit, right? Bornholmer is a kill zone, Bishop said, unfolding the map on his lap. If they have a cordon, they'll be stacking units at the checkpoints. We can't punch through a barricade in this thing. So, what's the play? Miller asked, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. We need to find a soft spot. Bishop said. The diversion at Checkpoint Charlie is still scheduled. It might pull enough heat away from the southern sector. We head for the Heinrich-Heinestrasse crossing. It's a commercial crossing, usually quiet at night. That's halfway across the city, Miller noted, through the center of the search grid. Drive, Bishop said. They moved through the wet streets, a ghost ship navigating a minefield. The city felt increasingly hostile. Every intersection seemed to hold the promise of flashing blue lights. In the back, Vogel was hyperventilating. The small, lead-lined box was claustrophobic, pressing in on him. He could feel the vibration of the road through the metal floor. Koval put a heavy hand on the man's shoulder. Breathe, Koval whispered. Panic kills. Silence lives. Up front, Bishop was watching the streets. They turned onto Schönhauser Alley. Suddenly, ahead of them, a roadblock appeared. Two Lada police cars were parked nose to nose across the road, their lights flashing. Soldiers with AK-47 stood in the rain, flagging down vehicles. Damn it, Miller cursed. They're filtering traffic. Don't turn around, Bishop warned. If you U-turn, they chase. We have to bluff it. With the whole city on alert? Miller asked. We have the work order, Bishop said. We're the water authority. We have emergency priority. Flash the lights, honk the horn, act like we own the road. Miller hit the high beams and leaned on the horn. The truck blasted a deep, dissonant note. He didn't slow down as he approached the soldiers. He rolled down the window, sticking his head out into the rain. Move it, Miller shouted in German. Emergency at the Alexanderplatz station. The sewers are backing up. Unless you want to explain to the general why his office smells like excrement. Get those toys out of the way. The soldiers hesitated. The authority in Miller's voice, combined with the official markings of the truck, caused a momentary lapse in their orders. The lead soldier looked at his partner, then waved them through, stepping back from the splashing tires. Miller gunned the engine, squeezing the truck through the gap between the police cars. He didn't look back. Nice acting, Bishop exhaled. I wasn't acting, Miller said, wiping sweat from his forehead. I really don't want to die in a sewer truck. Wait. Sarah's voice came over the internal comms link in Bishop's earpiece. I'm picking up a signal. Short range. Following us. Bishop looked in the side mirror. The street behind them was empty. I don't see anything. It's not a marked car, Sarah said. It's a tracker. Someone tagged the truck. They aren't stopping us because they want to see where we go. They want the whole network. The realization hit Bishop like a physical blow. The weather hadn't turned because of Vogel. It had turned because the truck was compromised from the start. They had been driving a beacon since they crossed the border. The ambush wasn't waiting at the wall. The ambush was wherever the Stasi decided to end the game. "Miller, take the next right," Bishop ordered sharply. "Get off the main avenue." "That takes us into the industrial district," Miller said. "Dead ends, warehouses." "Exactly," Bishop said. "If we have a tail, we force them to show themselves. We can't lead them to a crossing. They'll just box us in against the wall." Miller swung the heavy truck into a sharp right turn, the tires struggling for grip on the cobblestones. They entered a maze of old factories and storage yards near the Spree River. The streetlights here were broken or non-existent. "Signal is getting stronger," Sarah reported. "Multiple bogies closing in. 3 vehicles. Fast movers. They know we spotted them," Bishop said. "They're moving to intercept." Behind them, high beams suddenly flooded the narrow street. 3 black sedans, Volgas, the car of the KGB and Stasi, roared around the corner, engines screaming. They weren't hiding anymore. "Contact rear," Miller yelled. The lead sedan pulled alongside the truck, the passenger window rolling down. A man in a leather coat leaned out, a Scorpion machine pistol in his hand. "Down!" Bishop shouted. Glass shattered as bullets raked the side of the cab. Miller ducked, keeping his hands on the wheel. The reinforced door panels absorbed the rounds with dull thuds, but the side mirror disintegrated. "Koval!" Bishop yelled into the comms. "We have company." In the back, Koval didn't need to be told. He kicked open the rear doors of the moving truck. The sudden change in aerodynamics caused the vehicle to shudder. Koval braced himself against the frame, raising his MP5. The sedan was right on their bumper. Koval fired a controlled burst. The windshield of the Volga spiderwebbed. The driver swerved violently, the car spinning out on the wet cobblestones and slamming into a brick wall. "One down," Koval reported, but 2 more were closing in. One tried to overtake them on the left, trying to shoot out the truck's tires. The run-flat foam held, but the handling was getting sloppy. "I can't shake them in this tank," Miller shouted. "I need room." "Head for the river," Bishop commanded. "There's an old loading dock near the Schilling Bridge. We ditch the vehicle." "And then what?" "And then we swim or we fight," Bishop said, pulling his own weapon and firing through the shattered passenger window at the pursuing car. The chase tore through the industrial wasteland. Miller drifted the heavy truck around corners, smashing through wooden crates and debris. The second sedan was aggressive, ramming the rear bumper of the truck, trying to spin them out. The impact jarred everyone inside. Inside the box, Vogel was screaming, a high-pitched sound of pure terror that was lost in the roar of engines and gunfire. "Hold on!" Miller yelled. He slammed on the brakes. The sedan behind them couldn't react in time. It smashed into the back of the heavy steel utility bumper of the truck. The front of the car crumbled like accordion paper. Miller gunned the engine again, dragging the wrecked car for a few meters before it dislodged and spun away. "2 down," Miller gritted out. "Where's number 3? The third car had pulled back, keeping a distance. It wasn't attacking. It was hurting them. "They're driving us into a trap," Bishop realized. "The river. They have a team waiting there." "Too late to change course," Miller said. "We're here." The truck skidded onto the open concrete apron of the loading docks. The dark water of the Spree churned below. Miller slammed the truck into a drift, bringing it to a halt behind a stack of rusted shipping containers. "Everyone out, now," Bishop commanded. The team spilled out of the truck. Koval dragged a weeping Vogel from the box. Sarah grabbed the hard drives containing the encryption keys. From the shadows of the warehouse rooftops surrounding the dock, floodlights snapped on, blinding them. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Drop your weapons! There is nowhere to run!" They were surrounded. The third car had blocked the exit, and silhouettes of tactical officers lined the roofs. It was a kill box, perfect and inescapable. "Smoke," Bishop ordered. Koval pulled 2 smoke grenades from his vest and hurled them into the open space. Thick gray smoke billowed out instantly, obscuring the floodlights. "Move to the water," Bishop yelled. They ran blindly through the smoke. Bullets began to chew up the concrete around their feet. They weren't suppressed shots anymore. This was full automatic fire. The Stasi had stopped caring about noise. They reached the edge of the dock. Below them, a small maintenance barge was moored. "Jump!" They leaped from the dock, landing heavily on the steel deck of the barge. The impact knocked the wind out of Vogel. Miller scrambled to the controls of the barge. "It's chained!" Miller shouted. Koval raised his submachine gun and fired at the heavy chain mooring the boat. Sparks flew. The chain snapped. The current of the river caught the barge, pulling it away from the dock just as the Stasi team reached the edge above them. Bullets pinged off the metal deck. They scrambled for cover behind the wheelhouse. The barge drifted into the darkness of the river, the smoke from the dock masking their escape for a few precious seconds. Chapter 8. The Basement of Ghosts. They abandoned the barge a mile downstream, under the cover of a rotting wooden pier near an abandoned textile factory. They moved quickly, soaked to the bone, freezing, and carrying a man who was on the verge of a complete psychological break. Bishop led them to a secondary safe location, not an official agency safe house, but a cold site he had established years ago for a worst-case scenario. It was the basement of a bombed-out building in the Friedrichshain district, a ruin left over from 1945 that the city planners had simply forgotten to demolish. They entered through a storm cellar door, descending into the damp, moldy darkness. Bishop lit a small chemical light, bathing the room in a sickly green glow. The room was small, with a dirt floor and piles of rubble in the corners. It was a tomb, but it was dry. Vogel collapsed in the corner, shivering violently. Sarah immediately moved to him, checking him for injuries. He was unhurt physically, but his eyes were wide and unseeing. "He's in shock," Sarah whispered. "Get him warm," Bishop said. "We can't have him dying of hypothermia before we get the intel." Miller slumped against the wall, checking his sidearm. He had 2 magazines left. Koval was tending to a graze on his arm. A bullet had torn through his jacket, slicing the skin but missing the bone. "The truck had a tracker," Bishop said, pacing the small space. "That means the garage and wedding was compromised. They knew the vehicle, which means they know who we are." "The extraction plan is dead," Miller said. "Every border crossing will be sealed tight. The sewers will be watched. The trains are searched. We're stuck," Koval stated simply. Bishop looked at the team. They were exhausted, battered and trapped on the wrong side of the wall, with the entire security apparatus of the Eastern Bloc hunting them. "We aren't just stuck," Bishop said grimly. "We are effectively at war. That wasn't just Stasi back there at the docks. The tactics, the movement, that was Spetsnaz. The Soviets are directly involved." He pulled a small ruggedized radio from his waterproof pack. This was their last line of communication, a direct, encrypted burst transmitter that could send a short text message to the satellite passing overhead. It was a break glass in case of emergency option. "What are you telling them?" Sarah asked. "I'm telling Thorne we're alive," Bishop said, keying in the message. "And I'm telling him we need a new way out, something that hasn't been written in a manual." He hit the transmit button. They waited in the silence of the basement, listening to the distant sirens wailing in the city above. The hunt was on, and they were the prey. "What if they don't answer?" Vogel whispered, his voice trembling. Bishop looked at the little man. "Then we start walking east, until we hit the ocean or until we die." The green light of the chemical stick flickered. In the shadows, the team prepared for the longest night of their lives. They were alone in the gray city, and the walls were closing in.